Welcome, welcome to Bright Spots in ABCD. My name is Jay Van Groningen. I'm a board member with Great Lakes Urban. And the Holland story and my story converge at many points, the Holland Neighborhoods story, that is. The very first neighborhood connector here was working with a neighborhood called Heights of Hope, Tracy Forbes Hesh, and I had a part in training her in asset-based community development. Well, now in the City of Holland, there are, I believe it's 8 neighborhoods that are either established or are being incubated as neighborhood groups. And we've been learning a lot here in Holland about what it takes to incubate, support, and develop and support neighborhood organizations. And you're going to hear from some of the principal players today. So Lori is a neighborhood connector in the East Core neighborhood, and Jake is both her boss, but also he's more of a city coach, a city trainer coach in asset-based community development, nurturing and providing some infrastructure and support to all of the neighborhoods. And Mark Kornelis is here as a city employee. He is with the neighborhoods, I forget your formal title, Mark, but anyway, he's the neighborhoods guy at the city. And the city has been a really important player in the nurture and development of healthy neighborhoods. If you're interested following this interview today, you might want to check out the blueprint for Flourishing Neighborhoods that Mark, I know, will refer to. It's just a really exciting document that will help us nurture stronger, healthier neighborhoods throughout the city. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who is the Executive Director of Great Lakes Urban and the moderator for today's panel.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks a lot, Jay, and thanks to everybody for being here with us. And a special thank you to our panelists today. A couple of detail points before we get started. One, I just want to mention a little bit about Great Lakes Urban. We do, our focus is connecting people in community to build stronger, safer, more vibrant neighborhoods, leading to more flourishing cities and communities. And so part of the service we do in that to support that work is we provide these webinars on a bi-monthly or quarterly basis. And it's the way to share the good stories that are happening across the country. But we've gone from everywhere this past year, from Edmonton, Canada, to Wichita and beyond. But Jay, I think you would say this is a special one to come back to what feels like home base for us, which is Holland, Michigan. And boy, it's a pleasure to have you here. Jake Norris, Executive Director of 360, and also Regional Coach in the Holland Zealand area. And to have Lori Appledoorn with us as the connector for the East Core neighborhood and the emerging work in Montella Park. And then, of course, Mark Kornelis, again, pleasure to have you here as the neighborhood coordinator with the City of Holland, community development coordinator. And folks, a couple of things. If you hover your cursor over your screen here, at the bottom, you'll see where it says Q&A. As we go through this process, we'll have a moderated portion where I'm asking some questions of our panelists, but that might bring up other questions in your mind. Use that Q&A box to drop your questions, and we'll save the last 15 to 20 minutes for your questions so we can go engage you as our audience. The other thing is, you've already heard it used a lot, and that's the phrase ABCD, or asset-based community development. It is the focus of our work. It's the methodology, our preferred methodology for working in communities. And so to say a little bit about what that is before we get started. It's an inside-out approach to strengthening local assets, local resources, local capacities, and building on those to create the flourishing places that we all want, to build that future story together that we want, the preferred places that make a difference. And we have found over the years that neighborhood is an important lens for this, as these are small enough places, units of change, that we can build community and belonging across differences. And at the same time, it does give us over time, as you build more and more neighborhoods, we can create a citywide impact. Key to embedding ABCD methodologies into the rhythms and the life of a neighborhood is the work of the community connector or the neighborhood connector. And so these are folks who usually are residents of a neighborhood, and who work to discover the local assets and capacities and relationships, and then to connect people to each other, connect people to resources, and then to mobilize people toward around common projects that benefit everybody. So with that as an introduction, I'd like to turn things over, and maybe Mark, you could start us off, but if the three of you would be willing to share a little bit more about yourself as we get started. Mark?
Great. Yep. Thanks again, Eric and Jay, for the invitation. Happy to be here. So yeah, just by way of introduction, I've lived in Holland for 32 years, all in the central city. I lived, for those that are even a little bit familiar with Holland, I realize that may be a minority, but I lived on 11th Street for about 13 years, and then I've been on 12th Street for about another 19. So I'm hoping someday to make it to either 13th or 14th, or maybe all the way to where Jake and Lori live, up in the 18th or 19th range, but we'll see. I've worked for the city for just a little over 4 years. My career before that was kind of in more traditional human service work. I have a master's in social work, and I did a lot of program management sort of work in the areas of child welfare, poverty reduction, food security, homelessness, that sort of thing. So coming to the city was a little bit of a left turn, but I had some experience managing HUD grants, and that's kind of, I think, what got me in the door into this planning community development position. So my two primary areas of responsibility at the city are, as mentioned, I'm the community development coordinator. I manage our community development block grant. For those that are familiar with that program, if you live in a city with more than 30, 40, 50,000 people, your city probably receives a community development block grant. So that's about half of my job. And then the other half is made up of a few other things, but probably the next biggest one is, as noted, I'm the liaison to the neighborhood groups, and I'm kind of the point person for anything that's kind of going on at a neighborhood level. So we currently have 6 neighborhoods, 5 organizations working in 6 neighborhoods that the city supports financially, all using the ABCD model. I also facilitate those financial agreements, those contracts that we maintain with those 5 organizations. I operate a very small sort of mini grant program that's available to the neighborhoods. And I'm the staff representative or coordinator to a citizen-led board called the Neighborhood Improvement Committee. Jay happens to sit on that committee. That's responsible for kind of advising city council on all things related to neighborhoods and secondarily kind of affordable housing. So that's, I think, enough about me for a moment. I just wanted to say a few words about the city, just to give people that are curious about, where is Holland? What is Holland? What are some of the key features? We're kind of a mid-sized city, population of a little under 35,000, but we sit in a metro area that's closer to 110, 120,000, including the cities of Zeeland, if you've heard of that, and a couple of surrounding townships. We sit very close to Lake Michigan, but our city property doesn't actually go all the way to the lake, but we sit on an inland lake, or a smaller lake called Lake Makatawa, that feeds directly into Lake Michigan. In fact, I think you can kind of see that a little bit behind me. There's Lake Makatawa and then Lake Michigan over on my right. And the city, just last thing, the city is known, well, 2 more things. City is known for two things primarily. We have a very, very large tulip festival in the first week of May. Pulls in hundreds of thousands of people to the city. It's a bit of a zoo. If you don't care to see tulips, I wouldn't come that week. If you like tulips and like crowds, it's a fantastic week to come to visit the city. And we're also, the City of Holland is the owner or manager of the largest publicly owned snowmelt system in North America. And if you're living in a southern climate, that means absolutely nothing to you probably. But if you live in a climate where there's snow and ice, that means that about 6 miles of our sidewalks and about a mile of downtown streets are completely, almost completely ice-free all winter long because of a system that keeps that ice from building up on those sidewalks and streets. So it's really quite an interesting feature to the city, but I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Mark. And just one way that the city's innovative, but I think another way we'll be talking about that today, that's the neighborhood connector work. Also, I just want to mention briefly, if you're with us here, we did drop in the chat a link to the City of Holland's Neighborhood Connections webpage. And you'll see in there the map of the city, including highlights where these 6 neighborhoods that are currently organized. There's interest in other neighborhoods as well. Those might be percolating coming up, but there's 6 that are already organized with an organization supporting that work. So you might be interested in looking at that map as we go through this conversation. Jake, do you want to again introduce yourself?
Yes, yeah, happy to. So first I just had to say that, Mark, I'm glad you took the left turn because it's really great to have you in this role and you've just been such a great supporter. So I have to say, I'm just grateful that you made that shift. So yeah, I'm Jake Norris. I'm the Executive Director of 360, also the Regional Coach for the Holland Zeeland area, supporting this neighborhood connecting work in several different neighborhoods. But my original neighborhood is Southwest Iowa. I grew up 6th-generation farm kid in a little town called Red Oak, and promptly left for college in the big city. I went to Chicago, graduated from DePaul University, which is home now to the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, where I was exposed to this philosophy, this pedagogy, and all of this really rich content that I had never experienced before. And so that really changed the direction of my life, I would say, and definitely vocationally. But I have only lived in Holland for 5 years now, so I'm very new still in many ways to Holland. But our little house on 18th Street feels just perfect. We have an amazing block. We had our first block party in a couple decades this summer. And it was just an incredible moment to experience just all the richness that's there. I really love John McKnight's quote that the most overlooked gift of any neighborhood is the gifts of the individual. And it's just amazing to see those on display in little moments like block parties. And so, yeah, so that's I think that's a big part of my story, I guess. I don't know if there's anything more to say, but yeah, that's a little bit about me anyway, so.
Yeah, and thank you. And I'll just echo what you mentioned to Mark, but just what a gift you are to the City of Holland and to this work in the Holland Zeeland region. We will drop the link to 360 in the chat as well, so you can get there. Excellent work, amazing work. And Lori, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Lori Appledoorn. I am the neighbor connector for the last 2.5 years, and I have lived in Holland for 35 years. Our family owns a small business in town, and I got involved because I saw great potential for our neighborhood and neighbors wanting to do something to make the change. So we started talking with each other, and with the help of the City of Holland and their mini grants, we made it happen, and that's kind of what started. And then after that, I joined 360 and have been getting to know more neighbors and connecting with people, and it's just been a wonderful thing to learn about ABCD and just learn about how that works from just the very ground level all the way up to the very top of, working with the state of Michigan and finding grants and that kind of thing. So it's just been a really wonderful time in my life.
I should say Lori has professionally been a connector for 2.5 years, but she's been living it day in, day out for 35 years, right? In the neighborhood. Yeah. So
yeah, it's amazing. Folks, when you get to know Lori, it comes out of her. Being a connector is just part of who she is. So it's a real pleasure to have you on, all three of you. Mark, let's come back to you for a little bit. Give us a little bit of context. And I think in these spaces, I think about a former mayor that I learned through Jay Holland, who used to say, "As go the neighborhoods, so goes the city." And I don't think a lot of cities, a lot of communities really, understand that or really live that. But I feel like Holland's a unique story, and you're a big part of that as well. So I don't know if you would care to unpack a little bit about what's been referenced already, which is the blueprint for flourishing neighborhoods. Maybe you can say a little bit about how that came to be, the inspiration, and what it's about.
Yep. So I think, yeah, the story behind the blueprint starts with that neighborhood improvement committee that I mentioned earlier that Jay is a member of, that reports to city council, advises city council on neighborhood related matters, housing matters. And when I came on as staff a little over 4 years ago, and thrown into that role of coordinating the work of that committee, I wanted to find, well, what's it all about? What's its purpose? How does it work? And when it was formed by city council, I think in around 2012, there was an existing report called the Neighborhood Improvement Strategy. And city council, in creating the Neighborhood Improvement Committee, said, here's your primary guidance document. It was a great document, but it was going on 10 years old at this point with that I came across it. And it wasn't so much the age of the document, but it was born out of the Great Recession. So when this document was created, housing was, the whole collapsing in Holland, and not just Holland, everywhere, pretty much everywhere in the country. So that's really the tone of the report and the emphasis of its recommendations and that sort of thing. And it was just clear to me that we needed something new. And I guess I'll also say that the committee, I won't say it's floundering. It wasn't floundering because of their own actions or abilities or inabilities. It was really, I think it was floundering a bit because there was some rapid staff turnover. So there wasn't some consistency in staffing for maybe the previous 2 years. So anyway, that's kind of the situation I kind of came into. And it just seemed clear to me that the committee would benefit from a fresh understanding of what's happening in the neighborhoods and kind of treating it like a strategic planning opportunity to say, well, how can we be effective moving forward? So we formed a work group, a small work group. Jay was also a member of that. And they kind of worked with me over about 1.5 years to create the structure for the report and edit the content and all of that. So 1.5 years, 2 years later, well, and that's a long time period, admittedly. A lot of cities that would undertake something like this would probably, I think more often than not, farm it out to a contractor and say, here's $30,000, write this report for us. And that's not a bad thing. You get some good reports using that method, but I'm glad that we decided to do it in-house, but it meant that I had to do it around my own schedule and my other responsibilities. So it took some time. But it is, we did create, I think, a helpful document. And if you kind of do the math on that, you would probably, we're going back 3 years. We're right in the middle of COVID. And I think COVID helped. It was a little bit like getting a new pair of glasses with an updated prescription. COVID gave us a much clearer view of what's going on from an isolation, disconnectedness kind of standpoint in our neighborhood. So I think even without COVID, we would have landed in the same spot for the most part with the same sort of recommendations and the same sort of analysis, but COVID just really clarified the needs there around disconnection. So the report was intended to provide a framework. How can we as a city, as a committee, as a city council think about the health of our neighborhoods? So what's that framework look like? And provide a roadmap. What are some ways we can move forward to achieve a higher level of flourishing? So the framework part, just kind of the way the report is structured, it included, we spent quite a bit of time actually as a work group creating what we ended up calling 6 elements of flourishing neighborhoods. there's nothing, if you pull that up and read it, it's nothing really all that fresh or different, but it fit our context. We clearly borrowed from a lot of other documents and ideas around neighborhood health, but it did become our own framework for thinking about the health of Holland's neighborhoods. And again, 6 elements. I can go through those perhaps at a later point if there's time. We also looked at quite a bit of data, things that are kind of felt at the neighborhood level. I won't go into all that now. I can elaborate a little bit on that maybe later if there's time. But we did analyze quite a bit of data, again, really focusing on those things that you can feel at a neighborhood level. One thing that was a little bit unique is we did a pretty thorough analysis of walkability. Maybe that's a little bit of a side issue to connectedness, but there's certainly some connection to connectedness in terms of the walkability and the accessibility, the bikeability, the rollability of neighborhoods. So we did it a pretty, I can't use the word unique in its truest form. I borrowed, with permission from a community in the state of Washington, a more detailed analysis. People are probably all familiar with a walk score. Well, this is like a walk score on steroids, and not just for any particular point on a map, but an entire map that shows kind of in one glance, kind of what the walkability situation is for the entire city. So it looks at 8 different factors: access to grocery stores, the sidewalk system, access to transit, access to parks, a whole range of things. And then it overlays those 8 maps on top of each other to create a composite map, which gives that picture for the whole city on our walkability. And then we also relied a lot in the report on just best practices and on public feedback, key informant feedback from people doing the work in the community. So that's kind of the framework part. And then the roadmap part is a list of 39 strategies that we hope, to the extent that we can undertake them and move forward on them, we'll kind of move the city forward towards a higher level of flourishing. And kind of the underlying goals for the report, last thing I'll say for now is we wanted to help neighborhoods increasingly become places of connection and belonging. And we were hoping that each neighborhood, or our goal was for each neighborhood to provide a foundation for social equity. So that, again, hopefully gives you a little bit of a picture for kind of why it came about and some of the key content. And yeah, perhaps we'll circle back on some of those things as we continue the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and such great work. And the thoughtfulness and the approach is really appreciated. I do want to note that we did put a link to the Neighborhood Improvement Committee page on the City of Holland website. In the chat, you can go there, and from there you can find the blueprint for Flourishing Neighborhoods on the website. And we also have the direct link to the PDF version. Really great work, great document. And I was struck when I was reading through this, Mark, I think a conclusion that you came to, because you did an analysis of a lot of different tactics that could be taken. You referenced some of those just now. But what rose to the top is this idea of expanding the sort of neighborhood connector program or role in the city. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about that, and how, why is that a priority for the city? And then how does the city support more of that happening?
Yep, great. Well, the city's support for the Neighborhood Connector program, such as it is a program, it actually was at one point kind of a city. Well, things were happening in the community, and then the city kind of came alongside that. So that all kind of came together in, I think it was 2012. From best I can tell, that's when the city started using actually some of its community development block grant funding to support a different intermediary agency that I think just kind of stepped up to the plate at the request of the city to try to do some organizing of some of these neighborhood efforts. So in those early years, there were, and ABCD was a part of that from the very beginning. I wasn't directly involved, but I actually just by coincidence, really was working for that intermediary organization in a housing capacity, but it was a small enough organization that I knew kind of what was happening and what was going on. And I remember hearing a lot about ABCD back in those early years. So it started out with just 2 or 3 neighborhoods that were, maybe one of them was fairly organized, but the other 2 were kind of just in those really early phases of getting organized. And the intermediary organization was kind of their role, is to kind of assist with that process. But then it quickly grew to 4 neighborhoods. And then in the last 3 years, we've added 2 more. So now we're up to 6 neighborhoods that the city is formally supporting. There's other efforts that the city supports, but in terms of supporting actual neighborhood based organizations doing this ABCD work, we're up to 6 neighborhoods. 360 is working with 2 of them. So there's 5 organizations working in 6 neighborhoods. And we assist them currently with a financial amount of $10,000 in matching funds. So and those are unrestricted. The city doesn't restrict how they use those. We do kind of, in our contract, in our agreement, we establish some outcomes that they report back to us on that I think are very mutually agreeable. These aren't things that the city is driving that the organizations wouldn't necessarily want to do. They're very in line with the ABCD approach. But they are matching funds in that the organizations must show that they've raised $1 for every dollar up to 10,000 that we provide in a given year. So that, make sure that they've got some skin in the game and they're thinking about their own resources and not just strictly relying on the city's 10,000 to float the organization. So, why the city kind of supports this work maybe more than or differently than any others. I think, and circling back to the blueprint, using the blueprint as, one way of thinking about that, those 6 elements of flourishing neighborhoods that we feel like are critical to flourishing, it's really the neighborhood organizations, the neighborhood connector organizations that really much more so than any other type of organization doing any work in the city are poised to make an impact on all 6 of those areas. So they're doing the work already. The city has a good relationship with them. The city leadership, even before my time coming on 4 years ago, well before my time, the city leadership had a very positive feeling about the work of those groups. So yeah, I think just from going back to 2012, the city just early on saw the value in that work and saw the depth of the work. And then again, circling back to the blueprint, it was just evident again that they are impacting in each of those 6 areas by creating greater flourishing, by helping places create an identity, by building up the equity of the space. So yeah, it evolved over time, but
it feels like, it sounds like, what happens, I think a lot of times is as you get more connected, with the outflow of that, if it's shepherded well by that organization that's spearheading this, it flows into it might be better housing, or it might be safer environment, less crime, etc.
Right.
So it flows into those dimensions of flourishing that you speak about. Connecting in and of itself is a powerful force. I'm reminded recently of one statistic. Being connected or being disconnected, being isolated or lonely, has the same health impact on an individual as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And we can go into some of the biology behind that, but so connection by itself and having these connector roles, I think pushes forward public health, but also it flows then into all these other flourishing dimensions. And I think it's such a joy to have a connector with us. And so, Lori, I'd like to bring you into the conversation, if you would. We've heard about why this matters to from the city's perspective. Why they invest in this? But I wonder if you'd care to say, why does it matter from your perspective? Why does this connecting work make a difference?
There's a number of things that I think are really important, and the very first one is meeting new people and connecting with people, because of the pandemic, so many people are still isolated. So part of my joy is going out and meeting with people and talking with them, and just to hear people's point of view or where they're coming from. It enriches everyone's life because people will tell you things that maybe aren't your point of view or something that you have never thought of before. And so it gives you a better wholeness of how the neighbors work, what they feel, and how the neighborhood comes together on things. And if I can use just an example of how it all got started for me, is that our neighborhood, we all get into our driveway through an alley system. And so a lot of folks were using the alley to dump things over their fence, cars that weren't usable, just sitting there. And so a bunch of our neighbors got together and said, we're getting tagged all the time because it doesn't look like an alley that anybody cares about. And since we have to drive through it every day and see what's going on, let's see what we can do. So we all got together and decided to clean it up and take down some old battered fences. And through the city, there was a mini grant for $1,500. So the first year we cleaned up the alley, got all the neighbors together, and we put in a few raised beds so the neighbors could have fresh fruits and vegetables, because some of our neighbors are not well off. A lot of them are refugees. And so we put in I think 4 raised beds that year, and it just changed the alley totally. We stopped getting tagged from the kids that were doing that summer, but we also formed a community. We were watering and weeding and having the little kids come through and seeing how all the vegetables were working. And then at the end of the season, we had a salsa party. So everybody brought their favorite salsa recipe. We picked the tomatoes and the peppers, and it was just a really great thing. And I never thought it was a big deal. We just wanted to clean up the alley. But one of the best things that happened is one of the neighbors who we never saw came out, and she said, I'm battling depression, and to have this alley now filled with fruits and vegetables and flowers has made my depression so much better. And I've been out of the house for the first time in 3 months. So
Yeah.
A little goes a long way, that's for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really does. We had a comment in here, someone saying, and I'd love to see the art the neighbors have hung in the alley, right? So there's a snowball effect, it sounds like, that tends to happen, right? You get good activity happening, other stuff sort of follows on that. That's amazing and has a significant impact. Yeah. So Lori, you gave us kind of that story, and I've been to see the alley, and I don't think people can maybe grasp the picture of this, but I mean, we're talking, this is blocks long alley. This is not just like, a few yards and space. It's blocks long, and it's got art and spaces for you can come meditate and be present, or you can pick from fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables, and so on and so forth. And connect with neighbors. So it really is an amazing space. Can we follow on that, Lori? Do you want to share maybe like what's another story of impact, something that you're really proud of that's happened as a result of your work?
Right. Well, part of 360's mission was to know your neighbor. And so we formed a group of people, and we knocked on all 800 doors in the neighborhood, and 268 neighbors were kind enough to open up their doors to talk to us and what they would like to see. And there was so many things, no more trash cans and bicycle ramps and that kind of things. But the one thing that they said was they weren't really sure, because no one had ever asked them. No one had ever given them enough agency to even think that their opinions really mattered. So when we started asking, well, yeah, your opinion does matter. You live in this neighborhood and you have the ability to make this neighborhood what you want. And so what would you like to see? So 2 years ago in January, we put little booklets in all the businesses. And for 6 weeks, we asked them, while your customers are checking out, would you just ask customers what they would like to see in the neighborhood, and they would fill it out. We collected them and reviewed it, and the number one thing was more color, more art, more beauty into the neighborhood. And so that gave us a direction of where to go. And so that following summer, we did a proof of concept for a mural festival and did 2 murals in the neighborhood, along with a big block party at the church. And we had, I think, close to 250 people show up for the party, which was amazing. And then when we asked the neighbors, did you like this? They were like, yeah, let's do it again. So last year, we added 5 more murals to the Columbia Avenue area, and it was amazing to see what happened. And now we are on year 2, and we're hoping to do 10 murals this year. So it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing. What a joy when I got to be, just to come participate, just to experience and soak it in. I remember talking with, I forget his name, but one of the business owners who had the mural. And the mural, I mean, these are world-renowned muralists, a lot of them that joined in this effort, right? And they captured some of the history of that business person and their family history, right? And so that got incorporated. And I asked them what they felt about this. I mean, you could see the tears. He was holding back tears. It was so impactful for him to experience seeing his business in this way. It was so powerful. So thank you. And I feel like the other part of the story that when I came to the festival was, I mean, you were critical, but you had pulled in residents. Some of them were artists, some were, right? And so I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, but it wasn't just you, but you had pulled in all these voices and all these assets and abilities and skills and capacities of residents into that event.
Right. And what was also great is that we built an evening where all the nonprofits, so not all of them, but I think there was 20 nonprofits that came, so they could show what they're doing in the neighborhood and what they're doing in our community, because a lot of our residents needed help, but they just didn't know where to go. So we brought those nonprofits in, and it was just a wonderful event because the Lighthouse Immigration, they had like 20 intake forms for people getting residency and getting citizenship. They thought that they would, have to, kind of sit around and not talk to people. And she said within the first hour, all of their intake forms had been completed by people who wanted to do either getting green cards or registering to be citizens, that kind of thing. So that's really great because our neighborhood is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Holland. So to bring that out, and I guess the overwhelming thing is one of the residents who've lived in the neighborhood for 30 plus years, he was on the verge of tears. He said, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm being seen.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gives you goose pimples, right? Just to think about that. Yeah. Jake, let's pull your voice in because you got a unique vantage point, right? So executive director of 360, but also regional coach. You've got multiple neighborhoods you think about. So you got 6 neighborhoods that are at play that you're providing support to in some way. Just from that perspective and sort of like that 35,000 foot view that you bring to this. Do you care to share? Well, I mean, what's important about the Holland story, do you think, that we need to key in on, and how might that be useful to other neighborhoods when it comes into this, or other communities that want to take on this kind of an approach?
Yeah. Oh, so much I could share. I think if I could boil it down to a couple of the unique things and the key takeaways, I think it comes back to, I'm thinking of another Bright Spots webinar with Jim Deers talking about neighbor power in Seattle, and how he laid out a plan for being resident led and city owned. I can't remember the exact phrase now that I'm saying it, but I feel like the unique thing about Holland is that I feel like you can see through our story, through each neighborhood, but also as you zoom out, big picture, that it's really been threefold here. It's been resident led, I would even say church championed, and city supported. That's the phrase, city supported.
Yeah.
And I feel like that middle piece is so essential, because there's gifts, unique gifts and assets that any institution brings to the table and to the work of the neighborhood. And so I feel like right now, and that's what we've seen in Montello Park, and that's why 360 was willing to branch out into another neighborhood, is because of the displayed commitment and interest and buy-in from 4 congregations in the Montello Park neighborhood. And I don't think that's unique to Holland. That's the thing. I think that neighborhood is just one example of countless churches, faith organizations who are committed to the flourishing of their city. And so yeah, in Holland, we see neighbors coming together, organizing, creating a plan for change that they believe in and feel capable of. We see church leaders and congregations coming around those folks. And then we see the city, people like Mark and others in leadership who are willing to support financially, with their time and energy, making this all viable. So I think that's the big picture across the neighborhoods of how this is really unfolding. And yeah, I think it gets to Lori's point that we can show people what's possible, because a lot of people have never been asked to imagine more, or are content with where they've come from, right, in the world. They're just happy to have a safe place to sleep at night, right? So they're not going to push the envelope or complain. Some people are just grateful that we don't have the violence that we had 20 years ago in our neighborhood. And so for a lot of reasons, people are primed, I think, to dream. And so when we pull together something like the Mural Festival, it really expands people's horizons and shows them their place in all this. And that's what that's what this work is really about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm thinking, looking at kind of some of the folks that are on here with us. I just wonder, like, what would you say to a community when you move into this way of being, if you will, or this to adopt this kind of neighborhood connector program as the City of Holland defines it? But what would you say to a neighborhood or a community that's listening in who might want to take this on? Where would you have them start?
Well, I'm just gonna pull a page out of Jay's playbook here. But it just starts with listening. It takes time, that was Lori leading the charge. Like, we just needed to knock on everybody's door, and thankfully we had a core group of neighbors and other supporters who were willing to do that with us. And it took us a year, right? So it's not quick. It doesn't go fast. We just made a simple discipline of going out from 4 to 5 every Monday. That was it. Rain or shine. I don't think we ever canceled for weather. We canceled for holidays.
The heated streets, right? So you don't have to worry about that. So you have the heated streets, right? So you don't have the ice and snow.
Exactly. Yeah, I made that. We left that Central Avenue stretch
for November.
For November. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah. So that's just the encouragement. Listening is slow, right? And that's a word of direction that I've received from from the Lupton Center in Atlanta, Georgia. We've learned a lot from them over the past couple of years through a program they have called City Shapers. But the director, Sean Duncan, has just repeatedly said, you have to move at the speed of trust, right? And nothing worth doing is going to go fast, because there's just so much trust to rebuild. There's so many people who've not been listened to. So many people have been discouraged to speak up. So many people who've been excluded from the halls of power. And I think are not groomed to even imagine more, right? And so just going there, knocking on these doors. This was probably the first time a lot of people were ever asked to think about this question that we received from Jay in our kind of our training, our ABCD training, it's just, if you could wave a magic wand and make one thing better, what would change? And so many people have never been asked that question, right? Some people are very outspoken. They have a lot of ideas, right? But they're in the minority. But they're still the people that you can work with, right? Because they care. And so I think that's the thing. People do care, and especially when you're tapping into their inherent motivations, right? Their dreams, their aspirations. It's different to try to get them to come to a program at your church. It's different to try to get them to come to a town hall meeting that is at City Hall, which is a place where maybe they feel uncomfortable, right? But if you tap into what they already care about, you are tapping into the greatest power you will ever experience in a neighborhood. So I would just say, very simply, start by listening. There's no bad way to really listen as long as you're listening, right? So you could go knock on the doors like we did. You can create surveys. You can go to local, gathering points and just be a consistent presence there. I think that's the consistency is the bottom line. You just have to do something and do it repeatedly so that people begin to believe you and trust you. So if you've not started and you want to, just that's where you jump in.
Yeah, no, that's powerful.
Yep, and I have just found too, if you're starting in this, do something with the kids, because then the parents come along with it, and that is a good way to get things going and just see it, because all parents want the best for their children.
Yeah.
So encourage activities for the kids. Do the trunk or treats, do the 4th of July parades, decorating your bike, that kind of stuff. Because if you bring the kids, the parents will come with them.
Yeah, no, great ideas. And I feel like what's something that's been special, though, I think what you're illustrating is, it's the listening as a kind of that first move, right? But I think what's special is you've done that in a way that you're looking for patterns, and you're finding out, and you're looking for allies who really cares about those things that are really surfacing. And you're pulling those people into their own story, their own enriching story. So just kudos to you for really doing the listening, but also then think about how do we use what we're learning to move things forward, move people forward. So appreciate that. I do see we're coming up. Maybe we're past time, so I want to make sure we get some audience questions in, get your participation in. Make sure you're dropping your questions in the Q&A section. Can we take just a few seconds, each of you? Mark, maybe you'd start us off. This is a season of kind of hope and light. In this conversation, what's giving you hope around this work, around the future of Holland and the neighborhoods? And why should people invest in this kind of work? So a few seconds each, if you would.
Sure. Yeah, I guess what comes to mind first is what seems hopeful is that there's greater recognition, I think, of some of these negative trend lines around social isolation. From the Surgeon General's report a couple months ago to Seth Kaplan's recent book, there's just seems like there's more understanding, more awareness that, hey, we do really, the trend lines aren't great. If we don't turn this around, these issues around social isolation, the statistic that you gave around the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes, the ramifications are pretty serious, and we're quite a ways down that path. So we really need the work of these organizations that are doing this very intentional, trying to change the story on that. That to me, I guess, is hopeful that there's increased awareness. And in terms of rationale for support, I guess maybe it's the same thing. It's if you want long-term impact, if you want to have a meaningful impact, not just perhaps on your own personal space where you happen to live, or in the case of some of these other organizations like Great Lakes Urban that are doing more regional work, if you want to have that genuine long-term impact, I think this sort of work connects those dots, or checks those boxes in terms of not just having an immediate impact, but having a long-term impact on lots of people's lives and living conditions. So that would be my way of promoting it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Mark. And I'll just say we're going to drop our you talk about investing in your own place, right? And so we will drop our Great Lakes Urban website link in the chat here in a second. We do have a good neighbor page that you can go to that has strategies if you want to invest in your time in your own place. There's some ideas there that you can use. So we'll get that out to you. Yeah, Jake, maybe you'll take us next.
Sure. Yeah, I think right now, I'm really grateful for the work of Raj Chetty, who is cited by Seth Kaplan in that book, I know, and others, just because of the way he's visualizing intractable poverty and how it is so much tied back to place. It's really your zip code has much more to do with your health outcomes, with your financial outcomes, than anything else. And so that's where this work is so crucial, because even in Holland, which is an incredibly resource-rich community, we have no shortage of resources here, right? And when you look at this map, the Opportunity Atlas is the tool that Raj Chetty has pulled together, which I encourage you to look up. If you've never seen it before, you should go to that website and look at it and pull up your own zip code and see what it does. Because I was blown away to learn that even in little old Holland, right? You would think it's a pretty picturesque, ideal city, but even here, it's tied back to place where there is just a likelihood if you grew up in our neighborhood, you in poverty, you are most likely going to stay in poverty the rest of your life. And that just blows my mind. I mean, as disheartening as that is to learn that that's present in our neighborhood, I'm just so grateful for that work of Dr. Raj Chetty to show us this, to visualize this, to tell that story. Because if we know it, now we can work towards it. And I think it's even better case for this work, because whatever we've been doing is not working. It's not moving the needle. And so this is a chance to do something different. This is a chance to not just think about what's wrong in our neighborhood, but what's strong in our neighborhood, because that's not been acknowledged. That's not been seen or appreciated. And so that's what we are doing to tap into those strengths, those latent strengths here in our neighborhood, and bring out the best in our neighbors and our place.
Yeah, powerful. Yeah, we talk a lot about change the environment, you change the outcome for everybody in that space, right? Not a lot of times we work in these 800 to 1,500 household neighborhoods. And if you can change the neighborhood, you're changing the outcome for a lot of folks. Lori, anything from you?
I guess the most thing that I'm hopeful for is that all of this work that we are doing, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is hard work, and there are days when it is hard because you meet someone who just really is on the edge, or just, almost going to get evicted, and, what am I going to do? That kind of thing. And it's really, really hard. But talking with people, it is so great, because you start finding people, oh, you feel that way too? Oh yeah, down here on this area, if we could just do this, it would just change everybody on that block. Well, when you start hearing those things, and it's not just one person or two people, but 3 or 4, then you can start finding coalitions of people with like-mindedness, and that's where the change comes. And that's what I'm really hopeful for.
No, it's excellent. We got time for a few questions here, I think. All right. Someone asked, how have you been seeing ABCD help neighbors see themselves as leaders? And this really kind of follows up your comment there, Lori, as leaders, and step into opportunities for leadership.
Well, lots of times it's just acknowledging that they have a voice, and acknowledging that if you really want to have a better neighborhood and get to know your neighbor, that you can't sit back and wait for the city to do it, and you can't wait for your neighbor to do it. You have to lock up, and it's so much better to do it with a group of people than just one person. So like I said, it's just, finding those people. They're going to raise their hand, they're going to show you the way. And so just be aware of that and be looking for that, and you will find them. They will come to you, and you will come to them.
Yeah, and I do want to note on that point real quick, and then we'll go to our last question. But if you were to go to Great Lakes Urban website and donate, we're going to drop that link in the chat as well. But we really want to invest in the connectors to unlock that hidden potential. And so it's the best strategy for using the giftedness and the resource-rich places, unlocking all that so that you can create that upward spiral that Lori's talking about, create that action, the forward momentum. One more question I think is we have time for, maybe two if we can get to it, but let's see. First, let me note comment. Jay's reminding us that there were 3 layers that support this work. The City of in Holland, the Neighborhood Connecting Organizations, which are independent 501c3 organizations. 360 serves as an incubator, catalyzing agents, starting new and supporting existing neighborhood organizations. And then the city serves with a variety of resources that support and encourage the work of healthy neighborhoods. So what great summary. Thank you, Jay, for the gift of crystallizing that for us. And then there's the question of, Jake, you gather connectors periodically. Does that feel important?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Very important. So, so Jay was faithful to lead those conversations over for a few years, I think, before even I arrived on the scene. But for the past couple of years, I've been the one to call the different organizations and connectors together quarterly. And our conversations are different every time, but it's a great chance for peer-based learning, for connectors to swap pro tips or knowledge of new resources that maybe somebody was asking for and not aware of. But it's a vital part of remembering this story, because there's been so many people who aren't on this webinar right now who have been a part of this, and so it's important to remember our place in all of it. And our most recent gathering, I heard for the first time from Mandy from the Heights of Hope neighborhood, which was the first neighborhood to really pioneer this work, and she gave me permission to share this story. But I was just so moved. I'm still moved just thinking about it now. But she said, as a single mom moving into a poor neighborhood, that's seen as, that's the way it's seen, right? We know that it's more than that, but the way it's perceived, there's a lot of reasons why she didn't believe in herself even. But that group of people, like Lori was saying, those people found each other and realized that they had agency and that they could have a say on the future of their neighborhood and could shape it to serve them and their neighbors together, right? And that moved me so much, because for someone to move into a neighborhood to feel like all they see is what they lack, to then turn around and feel like a change maker, that's the greatest hope that we could have for any of this work. So yeah, so having these periodic, these quarterly gatherings are vital for hearing each other's stories, learning more, being re-inspired, sharing information and guidance. So that's a really helpful model too. So if you're thinking of doing this work, starting this work in your neighborhood, as a church or as a group of neighbors, right? Just find those other people where you can keep learning and plugging in. And that's where I think I see Great Lakes Urban being super helpful in being able to amplify these stories and tell them out and show you who else is doing this sort of work, so you're not alone.
Yeah, that's great. What I do want to mention one more resource is if you're looking to start into this kind of work, we have just building off of what Jay shared with us, which is this layered approach that it takes to sustain the work of this connecting kind of initiative. We do have a booklet that just kind of describes how a community like Holland, or in this case Holland, but how a community can structure that. It's our community works framework, and it's built off this model. But we've got a booklet about that framework, and we'll be dropping in the link for that, and we'll incorporate it in our follow-up. This is recorded, and we'll send out the link to the recording to everybody watching, and we'll include that framework as a possible resource for you to use as well. So I think we're coming up. We're at time, but I want to really take time a second here and just to really appreciate Mark really appreciate you. Thank you for the gift that you are to the City of Holland. Jake, you as well. What a gift. And Lori, what a gift. You're part of what gives me hope during the season, and what I feel gives light to this world. And so I just want to appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on and spending this time with us. And to the rest of you that are watching in, now or in the future, just thank you for your interest. This really is important work and impactful work. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll close this out. We're strict about keeping this to an hour so we can watch it over lunch. So again, thank you, and thank you all. And if you have any questions, feel free to be in touch with us through Great Lakes Urban.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well, blessings.